There's, while there's many kinds of adoption, I'm gonna break it into 4 major groups. The first one we call domestic infant adoption, and that's what oftentimes we're most familiar with. That's the adoption of a newborn infant within the United States. On the other side of that is older children, sibling groups that have been in foster care because of abuse and neglect, cannot go back to their original family and are waiting for families. That's considered special needs adoption. Then there's special needs infants. So because of whatever we know about them prenatally, or that they're born with some kind of special needs like Down syndrome, spina bifida, or something that we know that infant has special needs. Oftentimes infants are born that we know were exposed to drugs or alcohol, and so even though they look healthy, we know that they have the potential to have special needs in their life. Then the 4th category is international adoption. So that's children that are adopted from orphanages in other countries, and they might fit into the other 3 categories. They might be a healthy infant, they might be an older child or sibling groups, they might be a child that has some kind of disability, and they, like the children that have lived in foster care, oftentimes have also experienced abuse, neglect, and other issues that would be considered special needs as you raise a child. Now there's pros and cons to each of those that prospective adoptive couples want to look at when they're thinking of adoption. Infants in the United States are what so many people want to adopt, and thus there are many, many couples for every infant that is being placed into an adoptive family. So one is just that that's not as available. To adopt infants oftentimes is longer waiting periods and sometimes higher costs, because there's a lot of birth parent counseling and costs that help support the birth mother, both medically and sometimes just to support her for a while to help her through the pregnancy. So that's one of the things that a prospective adoptive family would want to consider, is what kind of costs go into that full service to help both the birth parent as well as preparing the adoptive family. Agencies provide a variety of services, and so those are some of the questions that adoptive families would want to ask when they're looking into adopting infants. On the other side, when you're looking at adopting older children, children that have been abused and neglected almost always have emotional issues. They oftentimes have other issues as well. They could also have developmental issues or physical problems. So there might be a whole series of special needs. So the family then would want to consider, are they in a place to raise a child that might have many challenges as they grow up? Do they have the capacity to take on more than one child? And what about older children that are never really going to feel completely a part of the family? And do they have the capacity to raise a child that needs a family but might not give back much in terms of feeling like a member of the family? On the other hand, because the states are looking for families to adopt these children, most of the time there's no cost associated with adopting a child out of foster care, and so cost considerations are nominal, but emotional considerations are very high. Adopting a child, an infant, who was born with special needs, again, the family really needs to consider whether they have the skills, the resources, both emotionally and financially, to meet all the needs that that infant is going to need as they grow up. So there again, while fees for adoption might be nominal because there's actually recruiting of families, the considerations for the family might be considerable and need to really be looked at in terms of, in your community, where are the resources, and in yourself as a family, where are your resources. Adopting a child internationally, pros and cons are oftentimes international adoption is more expensive because there's the flying overseas, there's all the working with another country. So besides just the adoption services, there's also the services that have to be followed through from the other country. Now, from the prospective adoptive family, they really need to consider that this child very likely might have special needs. Oftentimes, prenatal care in poverty countries is non-existent, so there might be some some issues in terms of the health of the child. There are diseases in other countries that our country doesn't quite know how to deal with or identify. So a lot of seeking knowledge and making sure that the family knows about those kind of things. And then oftentimes the children really were neglected severely or even abused, and so they have the same kind of emotional issues that children who have been abused or neglected have. On top of that, there's all the cultural. The children don't know the language. They don't, they won't have connections to their culture. So there's many considerations that a prospective adoptive couple or person wants to consider when they're looking into adoption, and to make sure that they're really seeking a kind of adoption that they feel good about and that they feel that they can accommodate in terms of raising a child.
With a private agency, usually a couple or a birth mother will come to the agency trying to make a plan for her unborn child. And so the couple would need to have a home study done, have all that background piece done prior to being matched with potential birth parents. Usually in attorney adoptions or agency adoptions, the couple would make a Dear Birth Parent letter where they talk about themselves, kind of an introductory kind of letter, and probably some pictures. And the agency or attorney would talk to the birth family and discuss, what type of family are you looking for? Are you looking for an older couple, a younger couple, or a single person? Are you looking for a family that already has children or who doesn't have any children? Do you want your child to be the oldest or the youngest? Those kinds of questions. And then they will select families within their pool of families that meet the birth family's criteria, show the birth parents those families, and then the birth family usually will select. So waiting time for that type of adoption can really vary depending upon what birth parents come in the door and what the other birth or adoptive parents are that are waiting in the pool. For international adoption, usually the different countries set up a criteria of what they think are ideal parents. And that varies depending on their culture and their beliefs and the values that they have within that country. So you may want to adopt from, say, Korea, but you don't meet their criteria for whatever reason. And so in international adoption, you need to look at what that country's criteria is, and then you would also go through a home study process. There's a documentation of paperwork, it's called a dossier, that would go through our State Department and actually through the country where the child's residing from. You'd have to work with, I think it's Homeland Security now, it used to be Immigration Naturalization Service. There's paperwork you have to fill out so that you legally are bringing the child back into the United States. Usually with international, if you say, I want a 3-year-old girl, then in that orphanage or that facility or whatever that you're working with, you get on a list. And when the type of child that you requested comes up, then you're the next one in line. With the public child welfare system, they exist because of the needs of children. They're not there like a regular agency would be to meet the needs of a family. They're there to meet the needs of children. And they never know. They could have 5 kids in shelter tonight and by Monday morning have 35 kids in shelter. They don't know from one time to the next who's going to be coming in, what's going to be happening. A lot of it has to do with our criminal justice system. Is the police force working on a big drug raid, and so they're going to raid 5 homes tonight and they're going to bring 25 kids into custody. That's how it works. And so it's a little bit different in that they are not trying to find children for families to adopt. They have children that don't have a place to go home to, and so they need families to come forward and foster these kids and possibly adopt them. So the waiting time can vary depending upon who's coming into the system. As far as cost goes, there's usually no cost to a family that adopts through the child welfare system. They may have to make some upgrades to their home. Most people don't have a fire extinguisher on every level of their home, and that's a requirement. They don't have their medicines and cleaning solutions locked up, so they might have to buy some locks or do some things like that to their home. But other than that, there's really no cost. For private agency or attorney, going through an attorney, the price can range anywhere from $10,000 up to $30,000, even $40,000. International, probably the range is fairly the same. Probably the least expensive, unless you had a friend or an attorney that lives in a foreign country that can hook you up, it's going to be $10,000 to $30,000, $40,000 again, because you're paying for travel for yourself. Get the paperwork done, you're paying for an attorney there, you're paying for all of your paperwork here, and then usually once the paperwork is done here, you have to have it sent to the consulate or embassy here, like if it was Chinese, one of the Chinese embassies here, before it's forwarded on to China. You also have to meet the requirements for the Homeland Security and pay the fees for that. And so all those things just add up.